I'm so glad you're here. It's full. That's awesome.
Hello, everyone.
I'm the more exuberant of the two people on stage, as you'll see. Should we ask people? I am unclear as to who is in the room, so I want to know, how many of you here are familiar with Ethereum and ConsenSys? Please raise your hands. Okay, so a lot. That's good. How many of you own ETH?
Wow.
What do you think? Half? Third?
It's hard to tell because
Okay.
the first half all own ETH,
Okay.
and I can't see anybody else.
Yeah. How many of you have heard of Civil? All right, I'll have to do more explaining about that.
It's
All
a
right,
little
cool.
smaller.
A little smaller. Let's start out. Everyone here is familiar with Ethereum and ConsenSys, but can you just tell the really weirdo story of how you got on this path, which was started out on an island in the Caribbean, if I'm correct?
May have started way before that.
Before that?
I don't think it's a really weirdo story, but
I think it's weird.
I guess it started before that. I've been mostly a technologist, so software engineer, did work in robotics, machine vision, AI for about 10 years, and other kinds of software projects, and eventually ended up in the financial space. I ran a hedge fund with a partner, built trading systems, and became much more aware of how the financial world operated and geopolitics operated, et cetera, and I grew a little concerned as we...
what year are we talking, this concern part?
2004, 2005.
Okay, pre-crash.
Pre-crash, exactly. So crash happened, and I noticed that lots of people were occupying everything, and I wasn't really part of the Occupy movement at all, but lots of people were similarly concerned and trying to get the word out about problems that they saw in the world with respect to centralized governance systems, governments, and the monetary systems that looked like they were end-of-lifing, the fact that there was so much debt in the system.
End-of-lifing, God, that's like a really clinical way to put it, but yeah, there was this moment that we felt.
So the average age of a monetary system is about 70 years, and centralized monetary systems have a vulnerability because you put people in charge and you give them independence, except politicians are influenced by money, and they are incentivized to dole out money and to potentially affect monetary policy to keep the economy healthy or spending, at least. And so you can build a fractional reserve system that works for a very long time if you're very disciplined. But if politicians are influencing the people that are running that system, then it's problematic. And so we got to a point where there's so much debt in the system and not enough money to pay off that debt, and then you get to the point where you're paying off too much interest, and essentially central bankers move to quantitative easing systems, so they're printing too much money, and you got to the point around that period where Japan started quantitative easing, and then other countries followed suit eventually, and essentially it looked to me like it was going to be a race to the bottom as all these currencies spiraled and devalued. And so along comes the white paper, Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin white paper, and I read that in early 2011, and it basically it clicked for me, it clicked for a lot of people really early, and basically felt like instead of doing the good work of announcing to the world that something is messed up, we could actually start to build and fix things, and essentially on a new trust infrastructure, we could take the thousands of years of technology in different niches and potentially rebuild it on a better trust foundation. And so Bitcoin suggested that. Bitcoin was cryptographic currency. It was a new invention, a new database invention that, because it's decentralized, enabled even if up to half of the actors on the system were malicious, everybody to trust that the system still operates fairly. And so that sort of trust infrastructure enables shared sources of truth, it enables fair playing fields for collaboration, and so you can move your economy from building siloed systems, walled garden systems, because basically the database technology constrained those systems to be siloed, to thinking about building collaboration, trustworthy collaboration as a fundamental construct of IT infrastructure. So we can start building for sectors, for industries, for value chains like supply chains, and that's transformative. And this trust layer also enables us to have natively digital assets. So decentralized natively digital assets, cryptocurrencies, crypto assets, whether they're representing something in the real world or representing something like decentralized storage or compute and storage on the Ethereum network. And so there were digital assets that were centralized before, but Bitcoin invented a way to decentralize those things so that I couldn't spend a Bitcoin to you and then spend it to that person over there in the front row. That was revolutionary because this thing, these central banks that were printing money too fast and potentially undisciplined at certain points in their existence, we could potentially build a system that didn't have that vulnerability.
So a year ago, I would have understood maybe 7% of what you just said, but I have a really warm spot in my heart for South by because it was exactly a year ago that I actually was invited to take part in one of the sort of experiments that ConsenSys is doing. One of the things that we decided to do, my co-founder and I, when we quit our public radio jobs to do something with blockchain, which we didn't really understand, was we decided to make a podcast actually trying to explain all the things that Joe said to normal people. So I'd love to just play a very quick clip when we tried to explain Ethereum.
Okay, I think we got it.
Oh,
Thank you.
We got to go back one more. I'm going to go back. You ready to turn it on? I want you guys to hear this. This is how we tried to explain Ethereum with song.
Ethereum. Yes, Ethereum. Ethereum is a kind of blockchain software, a protocol. So here's the thing though, anyone can use Ethereum software to build blockchain apps, except they call them D apps. I thought they were called dApps, but they're not. They're D apps because they are decentralized. Okay, I think we got it. Thank you. That's enough.
Are they dApps or are they dApps? I think I was wrong there, actually.
Both.
Both? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think
Nobody's wrong.
Joe very kindly.
It's an awesome
me.
podcast. You should check it out. Not only is it informative, I finally understood blockchain.
No, seriously, you have no idea how many
it's
people
very
have said that to me.
Yeah, exactly.
So can you just spell out for me, you want to save the world, the financial economic systems are screwed, you find blockchain. Ethereum seems to be the answer, not just because it's a cryptocurrency, but because it's able to do so many different things on top of that. But where does ConsenSys fit in then?
Sure.
When I went to visit you guys last summer, I really felt like I was stepping into a parallel universe where people spoke they kind of looked like me. They were definitely younger. They spoke a different language,
Sure.
and they worked in different ways. Can you just lay out the
Fair
vision?
enough. Yeah. So first, I was lucky, before ConsenSys, I was lucky enough to meet Vitalik Buterin, the guy who invented Ethereum, about a month after he wrote the white paper describing the platform. And so I spent a year helping to deliver the project and the foundation and the platform. At that point, we were getting close to releasing the platform, and I started ConsenSys because there weren't a lot of people building at the application layer. So we ended up trying to build dApps and dApps, and we realized it was really hard because we didn't have developer tools. There was no ecosystem really, and so out of necessity and organically, we built developer tools and lots of the infrastructure that enables developers to build more easily in our ecosystem. And we played a significant role in opening up that ecosystem. So we tried to build at the foundation layer, the protocol layer. We tried to build at the sort of financial layer, which is really getting active right now, and we tried to build at the application layer. So we've been doing that all along. So the way we operate, which is I think what you're trying to get at, is in as much of a decentralized fashion as possible. So our thesis is that with life on planet Earth speeding up dramatically, with these overlapping exponential technologies making it complicated to, let's say, operate a company that has a deep hierarchy, we should probably try to find a better way. And basically walking the walk, we're building this decentralized technology. We should probably try to organize ourselves in a decentralized, in a flatter, more fluid way. And so instead of hierarchies where you have slower decision making, the situated awareness is at the bottom of the pyramid, the decisions are made 2 weeks too late at the top of the pyramid. We've been doing our best to have as much autonomy in our teams as possible. And so we've experimented with different tools. We call it the future of work. We have one system called Sobol, which basically depicts ConsenSys as a circle, and everything inside ConsenSys is subcircles and subcircles.
Oh, happy Pi Day, by the way, speaking of circles. Right. Sorry, just had to throw that in there.
Happy Pi Day. And so basically in this system, we have all our projects and all the roles and all the people, and you can drill down into anything. You can have profiles, and you can log in with your decentralized identity, your U-port, and we're doing attestations so that if you're part of ConsenSys, we can have a cryptographic attestation on your decentralized identity indicating that you are, in fact, part of ConsenSys. We have goals, OKRs, KPIs that any project can track, that any person can track. We're building an agreements infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So when you move away from hierarchy, you lose clarity and you lose accountability. And so we've been working to instill all of that in ConsenSys.
How do you do that? How do you have both?
So we do it with an agreements fabric. So we have team operating agreements, and many of our teams have put those together. So, and again, the teams do that for themselves, and we're providing templates to help some teams. We have inter-team relationship agreements. We have mandate agreements. So if there's a funding body called Mesh Fund that can confer a mandate and funding onto different projects, and these agreements are fluid, and they can all be tracked essentially in this Sobol system.
I had never heard I'd heard of holacracy, but you guys kind of described it as the mesh.
We do, yeah.
Part of it?
So the mesh is all the people, projects, companies that constitute ConsenSys.
Okay, so one of the projects that ConsenSys backed is Civil, which I became a member of and which helped fund our company, got us off the ground. That has been...
And Civil is a platform for sustainable and ethical journalism.
That's a much shorter definition than I was going to go with. That's
I would love to hear your...
Yeah, no, I was going to say, can we trade definitions of what we think Civil's promise is?
Oh, great.
Yeah, so for me, part of it was, as a journalist, I think you very rarely have skin in the game. Journalists are really good at throwing, rocks at glass houses.
Wouldn't it be great if all journalists had skin
if they had to have skin in the game? So I really thought of it as my opportunity to actually be part of the building of technology. Yeah. I mean, limited, I'm not technical, but the one thing I could bring was the journalism. Yeah. And so over the last year, documenting that has been really, really fascinating, in part because there was a token sale. Yep. There was a lot of build up to the token sale. I would like to play a clip, this is my last one, I promise.
Sounds great.
From our conversation in August about the impending token sale.
Not only is Civil trying to resurrect journalism, it's also trying to be the first mass consumer blockchain project. Can it do that?
We'll see. We're setting the barriers to entry
very, very high, unfortunately. And we've been in long, deep discussions with regulators around the world about how to stay out of trouble when you're selling these kinds of tokens, basically how to structure the tokens properly, how to market the tokens properly so that you wouldn't be deemed by the SEC, for instance, to be selling unregistered securities to Americans. And so we've had to go especially carefully and slowly, and it's not about a quick win here, although we'd like some quick wins. It's about building a really sturdy foundation, sturdy infrastructure for transforming journalism.
All right, so there was a token sale. We weren't supposed to call it an ICO because it wasn't.
Because it rhymes with IPO, and that leads token buyers to think that there's some sort of potential return on investment.
Right, and there was a big sort of, I mean, I was on the front lines with talking to my listeners who really had never, these were people who had never bought crypto before, but because there was a journalism that they wanted to support journalism, they were like, I'm going to try this.
Is so broken around the world.
Exactly. So, but the sale didn't go that well. And where do you think the problem was?
So the token launch, the civil token launch, was the most successful failed token launch in history. And I'm being serious, actually.
Really?
So compared to many of our other monetarily successful token launches, it had about 10x more participation.
Really?
Yeah, so top of funnel, it did incredibly well. We had some problems. One was the gauntlet that we put up that all these normal people had to brave.
Hard wallets, soft wallets, cold ones, hot ones.
So it's 43 separate steps that our crack legal team put together, and they're just awesome. But they're trying to err on the side of conservatism.
Yeah.
We forced everybody to understand everything about the civil project, and most people, you failed, right?
It was hard. I failed the quiz. You had to take a quiz.
She failed the quiz, yeah.
So that,
the first time.
Yeah, the first time.
Yeah. And there was a quiz about how the Ethereum platform works, and so we're trying to take the opportunity to educate. One thing that was really wonderful, it was just many more people than we normally have looking at these token launches, but B, it was normal people. It wasn't the crypto nerds. And so we just set the bar way too high, and many approached it, but very few got over the bar.
So the good, I love how you just described it. It's really good. But the tokens it has happened. There is. Yeah. I was one of the first
journalists in the world
to publish to the Ethereum blockchain.
Yeah.
We got our tokens. But I think for journalists also and regular people, they're like, why isn't this working? Why isn't this happening? And my sense is that people in your space think about time very differently than we mere mortals think. Like, we think in like, is this gonna work in 6 months? Well, yeah.
Pretty much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas you were like,
how long does it take to click on this bait?
Seriously, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So I just got the latest, which is that the tokens, contributions are being accepted by Civil. 1.5 million tokens are out there.
Yep.
$315,000 in revenue, which is not a lot for.
So it's been a few days, right?
Yeah, it's been a week.
So and there's no big marketing hype. It's not a token launch. It's just the Civil platform is open for business. You can buy Civil memberships. There's a Civil registry. So basically, the way the system works is if you're a journalist, you can put a newsroom together, as you've done.
Yep.
And you can use your tokens to stake your newsroom on the registry. You show up with a list of who your journalists are, what your charter is, and you pledge via this security bond basically to be ethical and adhere to the Constitution that the Civil Foundation operates. These tokens enable you to stake your newsroom. It enables members of the platform to challenge your ethics if they see you do something wrong. It enables you to defend yourself.
But this is all largely theoretical right now, like, right?
So some of this is actually out in the world. This is being built. And so one of the tools that's being built is the ability to take an article and log it indelibly to the Ethereum platform.
I've done that.
Yep, cool.
It was cool.
Right. So yes, it's being built. It's being released in stages. One of the next stages involves, there's a group called Automatic, which creates something called WordPress, which many of you may have heard of. So about 60–70% of the newsrooms around the world use a content management system put out by WordPress. They are upgrading that. It's going to be called Newspack, and it will be Civil and Ethereum enabled, so it'll be basically very simple. Civil will be built into most of the newsrooms around the world, so should enable easy adoption. Associated Press is partnering. Forbes is pledged to use it.
I guess, like, to me, I was like, I thought this would all be up and running, like, right now. But in terms of the timeline...
Welcome to the world of software.
Well, I know, and it's a really huge learning experience for me. So when you are looking at sort of ICOs and tokens, and people are saying, I'll just read you a line from a recent piece in the Next Web. In 2019, token sales are pretty much passé. Their disappearance has led to a lack of fundamental buying pressure in Ethereum's markets. Are they being short-sighted or sort of looking at the short term as opposed to the longer term? What do you think?
So 2017 was pretty extreme, out of control even. There are lots of great projects, but lots of bad projects and lots of fraudulent projects. And there was this notion that you had to have a massive token launch because you only had one shot at it. And sort of the Ethereum project may be partly responsible for that too, because we didn't think that we could bring in all the techniques of the VC world and do a small raise and validate what you're building and do another smaller raise and validate what you're doing and grow your project that way. So
it's not typically how VC works, right?
There's a ton of greed, and so the SEC and just disappointment have stopped the bad projects and the fraudulent projects from happening largely, but the good projects are still happening. We're going to do probably 4 or 5 token launches this year.
You are?
Yep, sure. And these, we're just going to go at it in a much more restrained way, putting software out into the world that requires a token. Basically, it's crypto economic mechanism design. There are ways to incentivize people to participate in different roles on open platforms, and we think that's going to be transformative going forward.
Episode 8, TCRs, we explain
also, so those are consumer utility token launches.
Right.
Those are tokens that wouldn't be considered securities.
And is the SEC accepting that?
Yeah, so if there have been multiple statements by Bill Hinman, Director of Corporate Finance. Jay Clayton actually backed up some of Bill's words recently. So the idea there is if it's structured properly, so that it's a usage token, and if it's marketed properly, so you're not telling people who buy the token that you buy this token and you're going to make 5x your money. You tell people that if you buy this token, you can read news from ethical newsrooms.
I mean, that's a hell of a lot less sexy. Do you think you're going to get enough people to buy into these projects?
Absolutely.
Where is their critical mass? Because for a token curated registry to work, you need people who are there, they're putting down their tokens, they're voting, and right now I think there's 100 total buyers and nobody's voted for anything yet with Civil.
Right.
Granted, it's been a week, but...
Well, there are lots of people in our ecosystem. There are millions of people in our ecosystem. There are people who care deeply and just know an enormous amount more than I have time to encounter about the thousands of projects that are out there, and many of these projects are putting together open platforms that have tokens. We have one project called TrueSet, which is in a beta right now, but it's an open platform, and it basically is asking the world, basically sourcing the wisdom of the crowd to gather information on different tokenized projects. And it's sort of a structured Edgar-like database, similar to a securities database, but not just to gather new information, but to correct information too. And so people are getting paid in this token, and people are getting paid to correct data entries and to come into consensus about the corrections. So it's a system that works, and there aren't a lot of normal people who are using these systems right now, but there weren't a lot of normal people firing email around in 1983 or 90 when the web was invented.
Well, that's what's key here, right? Is that people like me are in on the early process, whereas we kind of didn't know what was going on with HTTP and all the rest of it.
We think Civil has a real shot because the news is so broken, because so we're building these new governance systems, making use of similar technologies, but if we don't have good information and reasonable, subtle discourse so that we understand the issues at a local level or at a national level, if we're getting our news from Facebook where it's just the dopamine slot machine, binary, I love this, I hate this kind of news, we're not going to be able to govern ourselves. And so lots of people feel like journalism is important, and this is a really good attempt, in my opinion, to try to change that.
I want to turn, there are questions. You can also put in your questions at slido.com. Also, the hashtag is SXSW. I think that there's some people who want to talk about ETH, according to this. I want to ask you.
For anyone who isn't getting it, ETH is Ether, which is the token on the Ethereum platform. It pays for computation and it pays for storage. It's like Bitcoin on that platform.
And within a few months of that token sale that failed with Civil, the price of crypto plummeted. How did that affect ConsenSys and your strategy more broadly?
Well, since the start of the ecosystem, since 2009, we've seen many incredible rises in the price of these tokens, followed by very significant corrections. So the most recent significant correction just took us back 1 year, which was, I don't know, 5,000 times more valuable than when Ether was initially launched. So
wow.
in that context,
right, long game again.
It's not so horrifying. Exactly. So every one of these rises in price, first of all, it's exponential growth in our ecosystem. So if you look back at the last rise in price, it looks like a little pimple on the graph, and we'll probably see more of these things. But every one of these brings a lot of attention to our ecosystem. It brings technologists and entrepreneurs, and those technologists and entrepreneurs are currently building. So there's way more activity in our ecosystem right now than there was a year ago or 18 months ago. There's much less activity amongst people who are paying attention to the price of these tokens,
right.
But there's way more activity among people who are building privacy and confidentiality systems and scalability systems and working on Ethereum 2.0, building out the base layer, and many building applications, many building new protocols. So
well, that's what got me excited about Ethereum.
Right?
Yeah. I want to ask those specifically about the projects that you're funding. Did the price drop affect in any way your investment in social impact projects? Because my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there was a pretty big round of layoffs at ConsenSys, including specifically in that department.
So we have been reorganizing for quite a while, and there were some roles that didn't make sense, but we've hired quite a lot of people since then as well. Social impact, we probably have 7 or 8 projects right now. 2 in the Philippines. We have a system. We have 2 systems for bounties. One called Gitcoin, and one that's more general called bounties.network. And so we, as part of the future of work, we define lots of work that we would like to see done, and we put money behind that, and we invite the world to help us get our work done. So the Bounties Network project did an activation in Manila Bay in the Philippines, essentially incentivizing the local community, paying the local community to clean up the beach, which is a big problem there. Another project in the Philippines is called Eye to Eye. We've been doing it with Union Bank for quite a while. Eye to Eye is island to island. In the Philippines, they have a lot of remittance in country, not just from outside the country, but it's really expensive to move and slow to move money across the islands. Their rural banks are running on Excel or pieces of paper at times, and so we built a rural interbank network so that instead of clearing and settling in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, payments can clear and settle virtually immediately. And so there are 100 rural banks connected right now, and we're moving rapidly to 500. I could go on. Our friends, Black Girls Code might be out there. Shout out to anybody who's associated with that project. So we have an ongoing educational relationship with that group. In Mexico, we're working in a Levi's plant in conjunction with the State Department and Harvard University. And the issue there is that they're trying to do a study on worker conditions. We use blockchain to give workers the sense that they can speak honestly and about their conditions.
Oh, interesting.
But not have management censor anything or manipulate the data.
So it's like an anonymous suggestion box.
That your manager, so you can say stuff about your manager basically, and feel comfortable that if you believe in the whole system there, and they're making a big effort to show people how it works, and that people have to pay attention to that data.
I want to take some questions.
Cool. Sure.
So first question has been voted up. Not your keys, not your ETH. All things considered, is it better to let a company hold your keys or to hold your own keys?
Well, I would prefer to hold my own keys, but most people out in the world aren't very technically sophisticated. The important thing to me is to provide options, to provide choice. So if you're able to get deep into the bowels of the system and understand it and control your own assets, you should be able to do that. That's not the case these days. But there are just many people who will need hand-holding. There are many people who would be more comfortable with different kinds of backup systems, different kinds of services. It's incumbent on us to build systems that are easy to use so that if we or others offer services like that to consumers, they're easy to use, they're secure, they're not centralized. One can imagine a custodial service that is in itself a bunch of companies that only have a piece of the secret. As we evolve the technology, we may get to the point where so we built a system called Seed Quest, which is basically like a video game. You sort of walk through the video game and you do it a few times, and you basically constructed your private key from which you get your public key, and you basically, if you remember, and humans are very good at remembering navigation. Mnemonicists use that technique to remember long strings of digits, basically. So you get into this video game, you interact with a bunch of the things in the video game, and it's the kind of thing that you won't forget. And so we're trying to build tools for normal people to be able to have much more control.
Okay, next one. I hope I understand this one. Have you guys on ConsenSys adopted ADO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization concepts, or have plans to do that? If not, what is your management model?
So our management model is to use our agreements and accountability infrastructure to build at many different layers of our ecosystem.
Is that new though? Because when we talked last summer, you were super adamant that things were flat, that there was a flat hierarchy and there was no hierarchy.
Well, some hierarchy is reasonable for different reasons. What we don't want is rigid, deep hierarchy, and we're trying to stay as much away from hierarchy as possible by having an agreements infrastructure. So basically agreement linkages that bind our teams together so that decision-making processes are very explicit, governance is very explicit, et cetera, and very rigorous agreements between teams as well.
So what's included in an agreement? Like, if we get in a fight, here's how we're going to deal with it?
Yeah, sure.
Really?
Yeah, dispute resolution, escalation of issues, KPIs, OKRs, all the parties, and cryptographic agreement, signature of those agreements.
Really?
Yeah.
Smart contracts?
We're using a technology.
No, come on. With management?
We're using a technology called Open Law, which is an amazing project that enables us to create legally enforceable blockchain-based agreements. So it can be like a normal contract with a bunch of English clauses, but you can also have programmatic clauses where you can escrow money into a clause, you can send data in, that clause can make a decision. So instead of static agreements that you file away somewhere, these are living software-based agreements. They can be transparent. You can stick them on the blockchain like you've done with your articles and everybody can read them, or you can create a digital digest of them and have all the different parties to that agreement sign it and keep it private. So yes, we are using that technology. We're not only doing our agreements in that technology, but we have a bunch of our agreements in open law.
I guess, and this is the humanities person in me, you went to Princeton, you come from the world of hedge funds, like tech is pretty bro-y.
Actually, I come from the world of technology and spent a little time at a hedge.
Okay, well, and more
Much
time.
more
okay.
a tech nerd than a finance.
Than a tech nerd. But what got you to, when you envision more companies potentially working like this, where they are trying to put trust, but also write it down, which that's not an easy thing to do. How do you see that fundamentally changing the way our society works in some ways? That it will, because you obviously have a longer,
we're not
a
trying to
bigger
sell
vision.
our future of work set of tools to Bank of America yet. But we're trying to dog food them ourselves. We're trying to build this out. We think that as the world complexifies, it's going to be a really good way to work. We think that as we and others build tokenization into our company, and we're experimenting with something called Meshcoin, and offer tools to enable others, small startups or similarly minded entities, we think it's going to catch on. We have one project right now that, so Civil is based on this notion of a token curated registry. Basically, you give people a bunch of tokens and they put a list together, and the list is valuable. The items on the list they would care about, and they would bump off the bad items on the list, just similar to an unethical newsroom. So we have a project called Utopia. It makes use of a similar mechanism where we have a lot of people at ConsenSys sourcing our values and defining our values. So it's core values tool. And we have definitions of values or names of values like transparency, and a bunch of different people do different definitions of those things, and we can vote them up and down. So currently we're just using it as a signaling mechanism, but we're thinking about attaching operating principles to each value and making it more rigorous in the governance of our company.
Well, that's fascinating.
That's kind of decent.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I just came back from a conference in Silicon Valley where a lot of the big tech companies are talking about putting metrics to things that we think of as being extremely ephemeral, like trust and empathy and all of these things. I personally am not sure we can quantify those things, but I'm very interested in seeing how people are going to try to.
Sure.
Okay, let's take another one. From your view, how large in dollar terms of a global disruption is blockchain?
So currently the economy is about $80 trillion. When blockchain fully ramifies in 10, 20 years, the economy will probably be 10 times larger, and blockchain will probably be a significant part of, majority part of that.
So 10 to 20 years?
A lot, everything.
7x.
In dollar terms, a lot. In terms of, so it enables automation of, good. It enables automation of trust and guaranteed execution of agreements. What industries need trust and agreements?
All?
All, yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
and we can build platforms that facilitate collaboration. So currently we are in this very competitive world. You stand up your company, and everybody else is a competitor. You're fighting everybody else. In rare circumstances, you can do some collaboration, but we think this technology will enable us to build collectively, so that collaboration becomes much more important than competition.
So that's the longer term future, but very recently, over the last few weeks, there's been some big updates to the Ethereum network. Was that an answer? I mean, I guess this is just how it works, but there have been questions about the network being able to scale. CryptoKitties caused some problems last year. Can you talk about this sort of ability to just do more transactions? Because that's what's required, right?
Yeah, so Ethereum can currently handle somewhere between 14 and 27 transactions per second. If they're really tiny transactions, it can get as high as 27. And you can't run the global IT infrastructure on that. No. What we see Ethereum as is as the base trust layer, and so call that layer 1. Layer 2 is a scalability layer. And so there are many technologies coming online. I could list about 10 of them that essentially enable point-to-point transactions or networks, blockchain networks that are less decentralized, but that have their own extra trust because they're partly decentralized, but where they get most of their trust from is linking into the base Ethereum layer. So if you're running a game or a set of games or an exchange, you can run it on a much faster blockchain system. There's a project called FastX that we invested in. It's an exchange. Theoretically, it can do via a technology called Plasma. It can do 65,000 transactions per second. So there are many of these Loom networks and many Plasma technologies. Plasma is a technique that enables you to have a smart contract on Ethereum and then a network, a blockchain network above Ethereum, and you basically checkpoint the state of that system into Ethereum every block or every 20 blocks or whatever. What that enables is anybody who has value, the tokens start on Ethereum, you move them to this network. Could be a digital sword in a game, you can move it to another game. If the people running that network are corrupt, if the people running the network are inept and it falls over, everybody who has any value on that network can pull it back to Ethereum. So you get, there are hundreds of thousands of transactions coming online. We'll probably could be at 1 million transactions by the end of the year that are nearly as trustworthy as those on base layer Ethereum. So layer 2 scalability is here already. There are games that are using it. There are exchanges that are starting to use it, and it's making blockchain very usable.
So does that answer the question? How much is this question, and how will Ethereum increase scale over the next 5 years?
So in layer 2, in the next 18 months, we'll probably have millions of decentralized transactions per second in lots of different networks and state channels and off-chain ZK Starks and ZK Snarks mechanisms. So
I'm nodding, but I'm really not. Yeah.
That's going to be really valuable. But Ethereum 2.0 is coming. Maybe it's 18 months away. Maybe it's 24 months away. That work is going incredibly well. There are 8 teams that are building it. Phase 0 of 4 phases, basically, will probably be done by the end of this year. There's a test net that will probably have everybody in sync in, say, 4 months. This base layer, upon which we will continue to build layer 2 scalability solutions, is going to expand by at least 1,000-fold. 18 to 24 months from now. So that, and it's going to keep expanding as we release more and more versions of the base Ethereum layer. But for now, Ethereum is really the only game in town, and you can build very usable things at layer 2.
So our episode that we put out today is specifically looking at the environmental issues that there are, and we went to visit the city of Plattsburgh, New York, which historically put a ban on all Bitcoin operations, and then pulled that ban back last month.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they just 2 weeks ago. But
Why did they pull it back?
because they decided that Bitcoin factories are welcome if they can in some way prove that they can recapture the heat and contribute to the city's to buildings there. So that brings me to...
So did they make that decision in the winter? Because Bitcoin's great in the winter. And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So, but that brings me to my question, and I feel like we were going to go into this on the podcast, but I was like, these people aren't going to understand it, but I feel like you guys will get it. Proof of work versus proof of stake. We got to go there. What's the latest on that?
Sure. So for background, these systems get their trust by being decentralized, having thousands, tens of thousands of different computers owned by different people. In order to keep them all in sync, you have a consensus algorithm. In Bitcoin and currently in Ethereum, you need to have specialized hardware, burn lots of electricity, waste lots of computation to basically keep everybody in sync. And Ethereum started by trying to do something different. We tried to use a proof of stake system. So proof of stake replaces all that wasted everything with a security bond. So you basically take some of your Ether and you put it into a smart contract, a program on Ethereum. And that gives you the right to be probabilistically selected to validate a block on the Ethereum network. So this phase 0 of Ethereum 2.0, that's about building proof of stake. The specification for phase 0 has been stable for quite a while. 8 teams are building it, so we're going to have the heartbeat of Ethereum 2. It's called a beacon chain, and it will enable all the validation power of Ethereum to be applied to 1,000 different Ethereum blockchains. And just because you can randomly choose a bunch of these validators and assign them to different networks, it makes it so that all of those different shards, those 1,000 different Etheria, are all equally protected. So the answer is we move to a system that uses barely any electricity, doesn't require special hardware. You'll be able to run it on your laptop, maybe your phone at some point soon. Doesn't benefit from efficiencies of scale. So if you have some massive warehouse of machines, they're not advantaged more than you and your laptop. And the barrier to entry will be very low, so we think it will be much more secure and more decent.
Now, when you say soon, are you talking like my use of the word soon or your use of the word?
Software use of the words.
Okay, so 5 years.
No. So the phase 0 system.
I love that there's a phase 0.
Yeah, it's nerdy.
So good, yeah.
Computer scientists start counting from 0.
It's great.
So phase 0 should be done by the end of this year, but it won't be a fully functioning blockchain system. I am very optimistic, but I think Ethereum 2.0 will have something that looks like a fully functioning system 18 months from now. It may be a test net for a while, but 18 to 24 months from now, we'll have a blockchain system much more powerful and scalable that uses orders of magnitude less energy.
There's a great follow-up coming from the audience. What project do you think is the most promising that is not a consensus project?
So the one that
Facebook coin?
Sorry?
Facebook's coin?
Jamie coin, JP Morgan.
JP Morgan coin?
Exactly. So one project that's currently really impactful is the Make or Die project. So it's a price stable token. There are about 130 tokens that track a stable price like the price of the US dollar. It's got a lot of traction and lots of people are building on that system. So we had a conference in Denver, Denver, a handful of weeks ago, and the administration of that conference got a whole lot of food trucks to show up, and they contracted amongst a bunch of different projects. So we have a project called a burner wallet project. The maker people have their maker system. The proof of authority people have their own proof of authority networks. And so we mashed up those technologies into a system that basically put an instant wallet, sort of a throwaway wallet for petty cash, onto people's phones through a QR code, basically. And the conference itself put, I think, 40x die, about $40, onto people's phones, because all the food was free at that conference. And then you could walk to any of the trucks, scan a QR code for a poke or for some brisket thing. You pay instantly. Unfortunately, you had to wait for your food, but the user experience was really, really smooth. So
South by
pretty
coin.
happy. So the Maker project, this burner wallet project, just enables ease of use, really easy onboarding for people. I was in a taxi a few days ago and put my credit card in the thing, and payment was just so fast. Those systems are getting better and better. And then I was in the taxi with somebody, and I was like, now, why do we need our fast burner wallet situation? So I think the taxi service pays around 3%,
right,
something like that on every transaction. At Denver, it costs 20 cents to make a payment, or to make all the payments.
All the payments.
All the payments. Thousands of dollars, thousands of different meals cost in total 20 cents. So it's like a tiny fraction of a second to run that network and to facilitate all those payments. So it's like nothing.
That's fun.
Yeah.
You're making me hungry. Okay, this one got a lot of votes. Is ConsenSys wholly dependent on Ethereum? What would happen if Ethereum failed because of a bug or a failure to move to proof of stake?
So ConsenSys is wholly dependent on the decentralized ecosystem succeeding. I think we probably give up if decentralization, if the decentralized World Wide Web never materializes. And the decentralized World Wide Web is networks like Ethereum and decentralized storage and decentralized bandwidth and decentralized heavy compute and decentralized identity and many others. And it's lots of interoperating decentralized protocols. We currently are intimately associated with the Ethereum protocol. We have 85 protocol engineers, and we're building out that space. There are many other great projects in our space. We have lots of products and tools that are focused on Ethereum right now, again, because it's the only game in town, really. But most of our projects have about 95% of their effort in just building a company, building a product. It's customer support. It's defining user personas and product market fit and just all those things that you need to make something successful. 1% or less than 1% is that thin smart contract layer, as some of the underlying logic of the application. If projects emerge that carve out niches in our space, and many of those use the same virtual machine, or will, the EWASM virtual machine, it would be very easy for us to take our software, and first of all, Ethereum's not going away, it's not going to fail, it will remain very significant, but if there are other projects that are similar to it that carve out niches, we can take all of our tooling and all of our products and also support those systems.
Should we just believe you, like when you're like, it's gonna be okay? Like, I never know it. Like, I feel like right now, we have to just, there are people, whether you want to be or not, you're in charge, right? Like, whether it's flat or not. Well, we look to you to like, does Joe think it's gonna be okay? It's a weird situation to be in.
That's a tough one, yeah. So I think we trust lots of different institutions in our society. We trust automotive manufacturers and regulators and pharmaceutical companies and regulators. We put those pills in our mouths. We don't really know what the biodynamics of those chemicals are. I can't validate all that stuff. So yeah, we're always trusting experts in society because there's a lot of complicated stuff out there. One beautiful thing about our ecosystem is that it's open source for the most part. It's a lot of very intense people that are scrutinizing everything and that aren't shy about squawking.
That's good. Okay, this
Including
one got a lot of votes.
including yourself.
But well, that's true.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Will ConsenSys ever expand to other open source blockchain projects like Hyperledger Fabric or Bitcoin?
So we
Kind of
have,
answered that.
so we all have used or use or come out of the Bitcoin space. IBM's Fabric technology is an interesting one. It's very useful for private permission systems. We do a lot of work with companies, banks, central banks, governments, and we use the Ethereum technology just because it's better in many different ways. We put out a client that can both attach to the public Ethereum main network, but we can also use it to spin up private permission systems and have privacy and confidentiality in those systems. So Fabric and our Pantheon client can do very similar things. One big difference is that it's much easier to connect. So we have a project called Kaleido, which enables us to run blockchain as a service systems. We were supporting about 2,000 different consortia on that platform. And one of the things that it can do is it can achieve anti-collusion for a consortium by taking the state of the system, checkpointing it, and putting it on public Ethereum. Also, if you're just building your private permission system on Ethereum and you want to move some of those pieces to public Ethereum, it'll be easy to do. We do have lots of people that used to work at IBM who are very familiar with the Fabric technology. We're looking, it is increasingly going to be an interledger world, so we're looking at ways to link those systems to either private Ethereum systems or public Ethereum systems. We're doing similar things with R3 Corda. We are collaborative. It's just a question of finding good use cases, finding good reasons to connect these systems. I think in supply chain, we're going to find good reasons to do that. So we're involved in a project called Comgo. It's a commodity trade finance platform. It's got a sister trade platform. There's linkages between those platforms, but you could imagine that some Fabric-based platform for supply chain wants to do business with our platform, and we're going to have to build that.
I have 2 minutes left, and I want to ask you, we are seeing different people getting into the space in terms of like tokens. Signal and Telegram are supposed to be launching their tokens later this year. Facebook is supposed to have a coin. JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon was famously anti-blockchain, and he's come around to developing a project with you.
Yeah, he always plotted the Jamie coin. He was just trying to.
Right, he was waiting.
Nothing to see here. This blockchain thing isn't going to happen.
So in terms of let's go back to the very short term. This year, 2019, we are seeing allegedly these projects coming online. Should we be, those of us who got into the whole thing because we were more interested in the social sort of the social impact side of blockchain and crypto, should we be worried that before we can even get to some of the amazing things that you've outlined, it's going to be the public's first sort of interaction with crypto is going to be with not Telegram and Signal, obviously. I'm referring to Facebook and, of course, big banks, that they are getting in on this. I worry that they're going to take away what seems, when you describe it, very encouraging.
Do you think the technology is going to be co-opted by the man, or just that people's first experience will be the Facebook coin?
Both.
Okay. So first, right from the start of the Ethereum project and all through ConsenSys, we felt like this is such a profound technology, it should permeate all things. And not only should we focus most of our effort on building out the public infrastructure, but we should work with different kinds of organizations to help them wrap their heads around the potential of the technology, build more efficient systems, build new business models, have some of those forward-thinking people leave those institutions and move over to our space, and we've seen a lot of.
Is that happening?
Oh yeah, quite
really?
Oh sure. And I think the fact that many of these organizations, and we started dealing with enterprises 3.5 years ago, and we just had to explain the basics to them. Now, so many companies are very sophisticated and building their own internal systems or consortium systems. So I think it's a great thing. Once you see this technology, it's so powerful, you can't unsee the technology. You start thinking differently. And so if we don't bring in the rest of the world, then I think we've failed. And I think the rest of the world will start to collaborate more and build better systems. Fingers crossed.
Well, I am so looking forward to seeing what the long-term story of this ends up being. Joe Lubin, thank you so, so much.
Thank you, Monique.